You got a job offer last year, better title, slightly better pay. You took it. You felt like you were moving forward. But then your rent went up $200 a month, groceries cost more, your car insurance went up again for no reason you could explain, and now somehow you feel more broke than you did 2 years ago. Here's the thing, that feeling is not in your head. Something in the economy shifted under your feet, and there's one number that was trying to warn you the whole time. You just didn't know how to read it. That number is GDP. And I know you're already thinking, Vit, that's a word for textbooks and politicians. And I get it, but stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to realize that GDP affects whether you get a raise, whether your savings grow or shrink, whether the money sitting in your bank account today buys the same thing next year. This number touches every dollar you earn and spend. So yeah, this matters. Let's get into it. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It's the total value of everything an economy produces, goods, services, everything, in a given year or quarter. That's the definition. I'm not going to spend 5 minutes on it because you don't need 5 minutes. What you need is the metaphor. Imagine you're the CEO of a massive company. At the end of the year, your accountant hands you one number. Everything your company produced, every deal closed, every product shipped, totaled. That number tells you if you're growing, shrinking, or stalling. GDP is that number, but for the entire country. And for the US, that number is staggering. In 2024, the United States produced roughly $29.2 trillion in GDP. That's approximately 27% of the entire world economy from one country. Now here's where it gets dangerous. Most people hear GDP is up and think, great, I'm doing better. That is the trap. And it's a trap that has kept millions of people financially confused for decades. Here's the formula economists use. GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. C plus I plus G plus NX. Consumption is you buying things. Investment is businesses building things. Government spending is roads, defense, schools. Net exports is what we sell abroad, minus what we buy from abroad. When you buy an iPhone, you just nudged consumption upward. When Ford drops $2 billion on an EV plant in Tennessee, that's investment. When the government funds a new highway system, that's government spending. Every transaction is a vote. GDP is the final tally, but here's the shock number nobody puts in the headline. According to research from the Economic Policy Institute, from 1979 to 2020, U.S. GDP grew by over 180%, but wages for the bottom 90% of workers grew by only about 26% after inflation. The economy nearly tripled in size. Most people got a fraction of that. GDP went up. Most people didn't feel it, and that is not a coincidence. This is the part nobody explains. There's a critical difference between nominal GDP and real GDP, and this is how you get manipulated by headlines every single cycle. Nominal GDP is measured in today's dollars. If everything gets twice as expensive but nothing new gets produced, nominal GDP doubles. But you're not richer. Real GDP strips out inflation. It measures actual purchasing power growth. When someone in a political ad says GDP grew 5% last year, always ask real or nominal, because the answer changes everything. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis reported real GDP at approximately $24.1 trillion as of Q4 2025. Up 2% year over year. 2% real growth sounds modest, but in an economy this size, it represents hundreds of billions in new output. The problem is who captures it, and we'll come back to that. This is why people making $100,000 still feel broke. GDP per capita, GDP divided by population, is supposed to be the average living standard number. In 2024, U.S. GDP per capita hit approximately $85,810. That's what each American theoretically generates in economic activity. Compare that to 1960, $3,002 per person. That's not a typo. In 6 decades, GDP per capita grew roughly 28 times in nominal terms. You'd expect everyone to feel extraordinarily wealthy. But here's the shock number. According to the Pew Research Center, U.S. median household income in real, inflation-adjusted terms grew only about 50% between 1970 and 2020, while GDP per capita grew more than 150% in real terms over the same period. The average went way up, the middle didn't follow. And here's the psychological trap layered on top of that. There's something economists call the wealth effect. When GDP is growing, people feel wealthier, even before they've actually earned more. They spend more, borrow more, take more risks. This fuels GDP further. It becomes a self-reinforcing loop, right up until it doesn't. When GDP turns, the fear loop kicks in. People pull back simultaneously, spending drops, GDP contracts further. Recessions can be self-fulfilling because fear multiplied across 330 million people at once is itself an economic force. Now this is where it directly hits your bank account. The most direct line from GDP to your wallet runs through the Federal Reserve and interest rates. Follow this chain carefully. When GDP grows fast, above 3% real growth, the Fed gets nervous about the economy overheating and inflation running hot. They raise interest rates. Borrowing gets expensive. Mortgages cost more. Business loans dry up. Hiring slows. The economy cools. When GDP is shrinking, the Fed cuts rates. Cheap money flows. Businesses invest. People buy homes. GDP climbs back up. This cycle, GDP signal, Fed action, rate change, cost of borrowing, your monthly payment, is the invisible machinery behind your personal finances. Every time you check your mortgage rate, your student loan interest, your credit card APR, GDP is quietly in the room. And here's a shock number to make this concrete. Between 2021 and 2023, as the Fed responded to post-pandemic economic overheating, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate went from approximately 2.96% to over 7.79%, the fastest rate increase in 4 decades. Millions of Americans who were ready to buy a home got priced out, not because of anything they did wrong, but because GDP dynamics triggered a policy response that changed their monthly payment by $800, $1,000, sometimes more. That's GDP in your bank account. That's as personal as it gets. And this is where GDP actually lies to you. Now look, I'm going to tell you something that most finance channels won't say clearly. GDP has a flaw that is almost poetic in its absurdity. An oil spill that requires $10 billion in cleanup, that cleanup activity increases GDP. The economy produced more services. Doesn't matter that those services were fixing a disaster. GDP doesn't distinguish between building something new and cleaning up a catastrophe. GDP also doesn't count unpaid work. The parent raising 3 kids, not in GDP. The person caring for an aging parent, not in GDP. But a corporation providing the exact same childcare or elder care service counted. And it doesn't subtract environmental damage. An economy can hollow out its natural resources, poison its rivers, strip mine its forests, and GDP will go up the whole time. Here's the shock number that makes this hit home. The United States spends more per capita on healthcare than any other developed nation, over $12,500 per person per year, as of 2023, according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. That spending is counted in GDP, but much of it is treating preventable disease, managing chronic illness, paying for administrative complexity. GDP calls all of it production. None of it makes you healthier than citizens in countries that spend half as much. This is not an argument to throw out GDP. It's the best standardized economic ruler we have. You can compare countries, decades, policy regimes. You can say the U.S. economy in 2024 was roughly 9.7 times larger in nominal terms than it was in 1960. Try getting that from a happiness index. GDP is imperfect, but it's irreplaceable. The move is to read it with context, alongside wage growth, inflation, productivity, income distribution, life expectancy. GDP is the foundation, everything else is the story behind the number. So here's what you actually do with all of this. First, check the quarterly GDP release. The Bureau of Economic Analysis publishes it at bea.gov free every quarter, 5 minutes. You don't need to read the whole report, just the headline, real GDP growth rate, and the composition breakdown is it driven by consumption, investment, or government spending? That tells you something different each time. Second, always ask real or nominal every time you see an economic headline. Nominal makes things sound better than they are during inflation. Politicians know this. Now you do too. Third, use GDP growth phases to calibrate your financial decisions. During strong real GDP growth above 3%, the environment rewards risk, equities, growth assets, aggressive debt paydown. During slow or negative growth, defensive positioning matters more. Cash reserves, fixed income, locking in rates before they move. You're not timing the market. You're reading the weather before you decide what to wear. Here's the bottom line. GDP is the scoreboard of the economy you live inside. It shapes your interest rates, your job market, your investment returns, and the purchasing power of every dollar you earn. You don't have to become an economist, you just have to stop treating it like something that doesn't affect you, because the evidence is clear. It already does, every single day. If this video gave you a new way to think about money, hit subscribe. Every week we break down exactly this kind of thing, not to make economics sound smart, but to make your financial decisions actually smarter. I'll see you in the next one.